Programming is supported by TKDA, proudly providing integrated design solutions for municipal, county, and regional infrastructure, buildings, parks, and recreation. TKDA, improving our communities. More at tkda.com.
From the League of Minnesota Cities, this is City Speak. I'm Luke Fisher, Executive Director and host of this season of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of our new season of the City Speak podcast. Our season is all about how city leaders adapt and change with new roles and challenges, and sometimes unexpected circumstances. Today, my guest is Noah Schuchman. Noah has a long history of working in city government. He spent much of his career working with the city of Minneapolis as the Director of Regulatory Services before becoming Duluth's Chief Administrative Officer. Noah is well known in the city manager field. He's active with the City Managers Association and even serves on their board. He's also a great advocate and ambassador for Duluth and a great partner to LMC. Noah, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for that generous intro. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Noah, how long have you worked in the public sector?
This fall will be the end of my 20th year in local government.
20 years in local government. We know that you've worked in Minneapolis and in Duluth, but have you had any other jobs in local government?
No, I worked in Minneapolis actually as a college intern and then started my actual city career in 2003 as a full-time employee at the city of Minneapolis, and then was there for 15 years until I transitioned to the city of Duluth in the fall of 2018.
So what jobs have you had with the city of Minneapolis? That's a big organization. There are a lot of different things you can do there. Where you started interning, what were you doing when you started?
In college, I was an intern with what was then called the Minneapolis Community Development Agency. It is now CPED in Minneapolis, Community Planning and Economic Development. And then I did some other things after college before returning to the city for the first full-time job that I had as a council member policy aide. I did that for about 5 years. And in the middle of it, I realized that my passion was doing government administration, that I was actually good at it. And more alarmingly, that I really loved it. And so I started to think through what that next step would look like when I was ready to move on and started getting at least my brain in order so that Sure. I was ready to do that.
So what does a city council member policy aide do?
In Minneapolis, at least at the time, it helps to coordinate constituent response. It helps to make sure that policy work that the council member is doing is coordinated and done with departments and with the city attorney's office. It really is kind of a jack of all trades in those offices and touches kind of every part of city government. And so it was my first real exposure to all the different things that city government does, and all without being an expert at any of them, which is a challenge. But you get a small amount of information and a small amount of expertise about kind of what every part of the city does.
So I would imagine that you covered things from potholes to big policy questions about tax structure or an economic development deal and everything in between. How did you start preparing for a professional career in the public service?
Well, I did what I had done actually previously in my career, which was to do informational interviews and ask questions to better understand what these jobs are like. What did I need to do to put myself in a position to get one of those jobs? And when you're young and overly confident, you can take some swings at jobs that you're not ready for. And so I certainly did that as well. And I swung and missed many times. And so having those conversations with people like Tom Hedges in Eagan and Craig Waldron, who was in Oakdale, were really helpful. And Diane Miller was in Eagan at the time. And so it's been fun to see some of those same folks as my careers progressed, but they were instrumental in me understanding the role better. And more importantly, for someone who was young and confident without real merit for that confidence, it was helpful for me to better understand what I needed to do to be a legitimate candidate and to really be able to do the job in a way that is appropriate and effective.
Sure. So you went from policy aide to becoming eventually the Director of Regulatory Services with Minneapolis. Along the way, was that the path that you thought you were going to be on, to be a department head with the city of Minneapolis, or did you always have aspirations to find your way into a city administrator type role?
I always had aspirations to find myself in a city administrator, city manager role. I had kind of hoped to work towards either being a department head in Minneapolis or leaving and doing a job like the one I have now. And it just so happened that my career was able to progress in that. I worked 10 years in the Department of Regulatory Services. It's a great department, great team. I was able to keep going in that department and move up.
So you're a department director in Minneapolis, and then you're going to make maybe what some people would call an unconventional shift. You're moving from Minneapolis to Duluth to become the chief administrative officer. From a career perspective, to go from a department director into that top chair makes sense, but not many people make the choice to go from Minneapolis to greater Minnesota, to Duluth. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what you thought about as you prepared for that transition, and like, who did you talk to? Who did you get advice from? And what kind of questions were you asking people along the way?
My family and I have always loved Duluth. And before moving here, it was one of our regular vacation spots. Yeah. So living along Lake Superior was something that we had talked about a lot. And to have the opportunity to work here was really exciting because it meant that I got to progress my career and live by the big lake, which even to today, I can see it, a little bit of it out my office window, and it's exciting still. I applied thinking I would maybe get a shot at it. I didn't have a ton of expectation because it is one of the biggest cities in the state. And what I really realized as I looked at it is that Duluth has many of the challenges that Minneapolis has, and different geography, different city, different community, similar challenges. And that's something that made it interesting to me. And, I wouldn't be here in this job without those folks who have given me that guidance, both whether it was in 2005 or in 2018 when I was deciding to make this choice. I still talk with most of those folks. I'm still grateful for their guidance and advice, and it is something that has been so impactful on me that I have worked really hard to make sure that I'm available to folks when there's an opportunity for me to be helpful.
So how did you pick people that you were going to reach out to and ask for advice?
Well, you got to find one to start with. And, I have the great fortune of working in a field with people who say yes to these things. I didn't really know that at the time, that so many people who do these jobs are generous with their time, really believe in the profession and the work that we do, and are committed to help bringing along the next generation of leaders. And so I thought I was having really good luck, and it turns out I was, but I had also picked the people who were, predisposed to being helpful.
So if you are a young professional and you're working in the city manager type field and you've got questions, maybe you shouldn't be as nervous as you would be to reach out to someone that's been around for a while. Generally, you think the profession is pretty helpful?
Oh, I do. I absolutely think that's the case. And I am probably setting myself up here, but I have a policy that anytime anybody asks me for an informational interview, I say yes to that, because that's how I got here, was through people helping me and giving me advice. And so I say yes every time. I'm happy to do it if anybody does reach out.
It's important, and it's probably something that you've experienced too, Noel, but this isn't something that just lives with professional staff. It's something that I think is very true for the elected officials in our state as well. I know your mayor, Emily Larson, has been generous with her time, helping people find their way, answering questions around what it means to be a mayor or what it means to be a leader. And I know that there are others across the state. Bob Burns in Marshall has been a great example of that. Dave Smigluski in Granite Falls. You can pick your person across our state. And really, local government in Minnesota has been like this yes and community where people are looking to help and lift each other up.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is part of what makes the league conference so fun, is people are legitimately excited to see each other and to connect and to find better ways to do things. And it certainly goes across the elected versus professional staff boundary, and it's just part of what makes doing these jobs work and work for the communities that we all serve.
Hey, Noah, as a bonus, how can folks learn more about careers in local government? Do you have anything in Duluth that you're doing to showcase what departments do?
That's a great question. The city of Duluth has a podcast called Municipals. that posts about once a month, and we have done interviews of our department heads, and we're going to work towards doing project-based interviews to better help people understand the work the city of Duluth is doing. And so if we're interesting to you, there's one way to get at it.
So Noah, thinking about our conversation today, there are a couple of takeaways that I certainly have. One is that it's important to work on your network. So you've got someone that you can call to ask questions of, and someone that can be your support structure and be a cheerleader of you in your career. It's also important for you as a leader to look for opportunities to reach out and be supportive of other people. This is a multi-directional thing, right? It's not just a one-way transaction. It's important to recognize that people in the profession and people in local government in Minnesota really are invested in each other's success, and that they want people to have good things happen to them along the way. And that all it takes is just a little bit of engagement and a little bit of courage to get out there, maybe the first time, and look. But to remember that you've got to do that. You've got to be proactive with it when you need something, but you also have to proactively look for people to help along the way too. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that's it. That's the code. You cracked it.
All right, awesome. Well, I cracked it with all of your help today, Noah, and your perspective. I want to thank you so much for joining us in our podcast today, The City Speak, in our 5th season. You're our first guest, so you got us off on the right foot without a doubt. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
That's it for our show today. I want to thank you for listening to City Speak. If you have an idea for an episode, feedback, or want to get in touch, you can connect with us at podcast@lmc.org. Until next time, be well.